In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up automated follow-ups for unresponsive leads and prospects that you have on a Monday board.
Hi, my name is Hazik. I'm the owner at the Workflow Company and a certified Monday.com expert. As a Monday specialist, my ultimate job is to review your current operations, offer you a free consult to discuss improvements, create easy-to-use board structures, automate tasks to save you time, and finally train you and your team on how to use the new workflow. If you're looking for a custom Monday.com implementation, my contact details are in the description below.
So we have a pretty basic board setup right here, which we're using to cold outreach to all the prospects that we have in the board. We have an outreach status that tells us the status of the outreach, meaning if the initial email was sent or what stage that prospect is at in the sales pipeline, phone number, email. Then we have date initial blast, which I want to be updated as soon as we mark the outreach status to initial email sent. And then we have two status columns here, which are changing based on the automations that I have right here. So for the opened status column, this would change to yes as soon as a prospect that we initially mass email to opens up our email, and then we have a reply status which changes based on the conversation that we're having with the prospect. So if we receive a reply from the prospect's end, this would change to reply due, meaning the reply is due from our side. And when we go ahead and reply to that prospect, this would automatically change to reply sent. If you're interested in learning how to set these automations up and also mass emailing people from Monday Sales CRM, you can look at my emails and activities video. The link will be somewhere up top. Now, based on the automations that we have set up right here, we will have an idea of who opened our emails, who replied back to us, and who did not. And the idea is that we want to set up a three-step follow-up system, automated follow-up system for all the prospects who did not reply to the initial email blast that was sent out to them. So all these prospects have already been sent a mass email blast, and now we're going to track who replied back to us. And if any of these prospects have not replied back to us in 7, 14, or 21 days, then we want to do a follow-up with them before we completely mark this lead as dead. So I want to add a couple of groups here just so that we can have all the automations in place for the follow-up. I think the first group that I'll have here would be dead leads. So even if somebody doesn't reply back to us after 21 days follow-up, then we'll mark that lead as dead on an automatic basis. The in follow-up group would have all the prospects that the system is automatically following up with at any given time. And we can add another group here for closed. Okay. All right, so let's add a couple of statuses here as well. So we want the first follow-up to be done 7 days after the initial email is sent out to them, and we don't receive a reply. So 7-day follow-up. I'm naming this 7-day follow-up done because I'm thinking the automation that I want to set up is that whenever the 7 days follow-up is done and the follow-up email is sent out to the client automatically, the outreach status changes to 7 days follow-up done, so we can know exactly what phase of the follow-up any given prospect is in. And we'll go ahead and add 14 days follow-up done, and then so 21 days follow-up done. And then let's say if somebody does not reply to us even after 21 days, then we would want to mark them as dead or not interested leads. I would also want another date column here, and I want this to be last follow-up on. So every time, let's say a 7-day follow-up was done, the outreach status changes to 7 days follow-up done, and then this date gets updated to tell us exactly the date on which that particular follow-up was done. So we can look at the outreach status and the date of the last follow-up that was done to know exactly the follow-up situation with that particular prospect. Now let's go ahead and create the automation that would actually do the automated follow-ups for us. So we'll say first things first, since all these people have been sent an initial blast, we will change their outreach status to initial email sent. And this should move them to this group right here. And then date initial blast should get updated just like that. So now what we want is that 7 days after date initial blast arrives, and the outreach status is still initial email sent, meaning that we're not negotiating with them, the deal is not closed, or it's not already marked dead or not interested, then we want to go ahead and do a follow-up with them. So the automation here is that when, so 7 days after the date initial blast arrives, and only if outreach status is initial email sent, then we want to go ahead and send an email, and then we want to mark the status, the outreach status, as 7-day follow-up done, and then we also want to update the date when the last follow-up was done, right? So I'll choose my email here, and then we want to send an email to the person in the email column, of course, and then we can type whatever email. So this is 7-day follow-up, 7-day follow-up email, right? Of course, you can draft a way better email with mapping fields from the board itself, but just for the sake of an example, I'll just quickly draft this email. So the trigger here is that 7 days after the date initial blast arrives, the date initial blast automatically gets set when we mark a prospect as initial email sent. So 7 days after that date, only if the outreach status is initial email sent, which means that the outreach status did not change to negotiation or closed or dead by the person who is the owner of the board or who is managing all these prospects on the board, only then this would trigger, and then an email would be sent out to that prospect. And then once that email is sent out, we want to update the outreach status to say that the 7-day follow-up has been done, and then update the last follow-up date to show us when the 7-day follow-up was done. So we'll create that automation. Now, once this automation is created, creating the automation for the 14 and 21 days follow-up is a pretty simple process. We can just simply duplicate this automation and say 14 days after date initial blast arrives, and only if outreach status is. Now, in this case, the outreach status would not be initial email sent, because when we sent the automated follow-up email at 7 days mark, we were changing the outreach status to 7-day follow-up done. So now we want to send out an email after 14 days only if the outreach status is 7-day follow-up done, which means that, let's say after that 7-day follow-up, the prospect replied, and maybe they're negotiating right now, maybe the deal is closed, or maybe he said he was not interested, and the person who's managing this board came onto the board and marked the lead as dead. Then of course there is no point to follow up with that prospect. So we're only going to do the 14 days automated follow-up if only the 7-day follow-up was done and still there was no reply from the prospect's end. So 14 days after the date initial blast arrives, and only if outreach status is 7-day follow-up done, then we send out an email again. You can change this email however you want, and then set the outreach status to 14 days follow-up done. And then last follow-up date would again be updated when the 14 days follow-up would be done. Now we'll do exactly that for the 21 days follow-up as well. So the same logic applies here. 21 days after the date initial blast arrives, and only if outreach status is 14 days follow-up done, because when we did the 14 days follow-up, we changed this outreach status to 14 days follow-up done. So when that happens, send out an email and then set the outreach status to 21 days follow-up done, and set last follow-up date to today. Okay, so now we have all the automations in place. So this is the date initial blast, which got added as soon as we changed the outreach status to initial email sent. Now 7 days after this date arrives, which would be 23rd of September, an automated email would be sent out to this prospect only if the outreach status was initial email sent. If, let's say, this changed to negotiation, or this changed to closed, or this changed to dead or not interested by the person who is managing all these prospects, meaning the owner of the board or anybody who's working on the board, then the follow-up would not happen. Now, we also want an automation in place where if a person does not reply back to us even after the third follow-up, which we do after 21 days of the initial blast, then we want to go ahead and mark this lead as dead. What we can do is we can either change this automation, the 21 days follow-up, and say, when you've done the third follow-up, which is after 21 days, you can just come here and change the outreach status to dead instead of 21 days follow-up. But for some of the clients that I've implemented the system for, they would want to give the clients a couple of days after the third follow-up done, just to see if they go ahead and reply back. And if they still don't, then we mark them as dead. So in order to set that automation up, what we can do is we can set up another automation here, which says, let's say 3 days after the last follow-up on arrives and the status is, outreach status is 21 days follow-up done, then move item to group. Then actually we want to mark the lead as dead. So let's say for this prospect right here, if the last follow-up that was done was today, what would happen is that 3 days later, as per the automation, which is 3 days after last follow-up on arrives, and only if outreach status is 21 days follow-up done. So 3 days after today, which would be 19th, and since the status is 21 days follow-up done, so we have given the prospect another 3 days after the third follow-up, which was on the 21st day. We'll mark this lead as dead or not interested on an automatic basis. Now, of course, we can add some basic automations here to move all the people which are in follow-up to the relevant group. So if the outreach status is 7-day follow-up done, so now whenever we have people that are being followed up with marked here, they would all show up in the in follow-up group that we have right here. But we want to keep a keen eye on all the people who were in follow-up or automated follow-ups, but they do reply back to us, right? So we have a status here which would change to reply due whenever we receive a reply from the prospect's end, and then we have the outreach statuses here to tell us who exactly is in outreach. So I'll create a new board view here and I'll add some relevant filters. So I'll say if the outreach status is 7-day follow-up, 14 days follow-up, and 21 days follow-up done, show those items. And then, or maybe I can just say, where the group is in follow-up, because it would have all those items, show that. But with that, I only want to see the people where the reply status is reply due, meaning they've sent us an email and the reply is due from our end. So I'll add another condition here and say where reply status is reply due. So now every time, and I can go ahead and name this to in follow-up urgent, right? So if let's say this particular, these prospects were in follow-up, but they do reply back to us, this would automatically change to reply due. And then all the prospects which were in a follow-up phase and replied back to us would all show up here in this particular board view. And then we can just go ahead and see what they replied back. And if let's say they're not interested, then we can mark them as dead. If they want to discuss more, we can maybe change the status to negotiation. In any case, when the status is not initial email sent, they would not be follow up with. So this is how you set up automated follow-ups for your unresponsive leads or prospects on your Monday board. If you have any confusions, feel free to comment down below. If you're looking for a custom Monday implementation, feel free to book a 30 minutes free consultation with me. My contact details are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.